Today, guys, we're going to be looking at the Gettysburg Address, which some people consider the greatest presidential speech in all of history. A little bit of background for you. The Gettysburg Address occurred about 4 months after the actual Battle of Gettysburg happened. So 4 months have gone by, and what's happened during that 4 months is the town of Gettysburg is having to clean up after the battle. You know, there's been bodies everywhere. There's destruction to the town. There's been psychological damage to the people that live there. And they have, in that 4 months interlude, constructed a cemetery and buried some of the dead in that cemetery. Mostly Union soldiers, although there are some Confederates. The reason why most of the Confederates are not buried there is because the Confederate Army usually took their dead with them for burial down in the South after a battle took place. It was common practice in those days to at least grant, the two sides would grant each other enough time to be able to at least collect their dead and not launch attacks during those vulnerable times. There was a certain level of respect and lines you didn't cross even in warfare during the time. Well, a battlefield, a cemetery is constructed on the battlefield itself, still exists to this day, and in November there is a dedication ceremony. Basically, there's going to be a lot of different people who show up and give speeches about the importance of Gettysburg, this battle, and what it symbolizes, because both sides recognize that Gettysburg is a turning point in the war itself, and Lincoln recognizes this more than most. And so he writes a speech. Now, a speech, of course, is either called a speech or an address. You are addressing a group of people. And he follows a really well-known orator, Stephen Douglas, who gives a couple hours worth of a speech before Lincoln. Lincoln, when he stands up, he gives a 2-minute speech that's only 272 words. It's very quick. It's very to the point, but the words he uses are incredible. And there's rumors that a lot of people believe that Lincoln wrote this the day before on the train over to Gettysburg from Washington, D.C. That's not true at all. In fact, he spent a lot of time developing this speech, and he even arrived at Gettysburg a day early to make sure that he would be on time for the ceremony and would have time to tweak the speech and make appropriate changes to it. This is what he wrote. And I'm going to read this once through without explaining any of it, and then we're going to go back and examine it together. You don't have to answer any questions with this. I just want you to hear the speech and understand what it means, because these words really represent the whole point of the Civil War. He basically, in a 2-minute speech, summarizes the entire point of battles like this and why it's so important. Here's the Gettysburg Address. You are welcome to follow along with me. You can print this out because I'm going to include the PDF on here. But here we go. 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who have gave their lives that the nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here, have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or to detract. The world will little note, nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, and that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. That's a lot. He says a lot in a 2-minute speech. Let's break this down together really briefly. fourscore and 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation. Fourscore, what is that? Well, a score is 20 years. So fourscore, 4 times 20 is 80, and 7 years ago. 87 years before this time, people conceived a new nation. What do you mean? Well, if you take 1863 and you subtract 87 from it, you get the year 1776. What he's saying here is, in 1776, our forefathers brought forth on this continent a new nation. Hey, in 1776, they made a new nation, and it was born in liberty. And the whole point of this country was to try and promote this idea that all men are created equal. Now we are in the middle of a civil war. Here's what he says next. Now we're in the middle of a civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation that's testing this idea of all men are created equal can survive. So hey, we're in the middle of a civil war to see, can a nation that is promoting this idea of equal rights for everyone, can that nation continue to exist? We are met on a great battlefield of that war. Hey, we're here at Gettysburg. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place who gave their lives so that the country could live. And hey, it's a good thing that we're doing this. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But then he goes on in the last paragraph and he says, hey, you know what? We are not worthy to make this ground special. In a larger sense, we can't dedicate, we can't consecrate, we can't hallow this ground. In other words, we can't make this ground special. The dead and the living, the people who fought here, they're the ones who have made it special, far above our ability to make it seem more important or less important. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here. Yeah, no. The world actually remembers this speech really well, but it can never forget what they did here. I wish that were completely true. But I look around America and sometimes we forget the struggles that we've experienced beforehand. It is for us, the living rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work, which they who fought here have thus so far nobly advanced. In other words, hey, the people who died, they were fighting for this cause of equal rights. They're dead. We need to continue this fight. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to the cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion. In other words, hey, it's up to us to continue what these guys started and what these guys gave their last full measure of devotion, their lives for. That we resolve these dead shall not have died in vain. Hey, we don't want these guys to have died for nothing. We want them to have died for something, actually. And that means we need to finish this war and get freedom for all. That this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom. In other words, hey, when all this is over, when the Civil War is over, we are going to experience freedom like has never been experienced in America before. And that government of the people, by the people, for the people, a government that is represented by people, not dictators or tyrants or kings or queens, this kind of government that believes in equal rights for all, will not perish from the earth. That is what Lincoln is saying here. He's basically summarizing the entire Civil War. Hey, 87 years ago, 7 years ago, this country was built, created, to be able to test, to experiment with, can we have equal rights for everyone? And now this whole war is about seeing whether that experiment can continue or not and get better, or is it going to fall apart? And it's up to us to continue this struggle. He gives the speech, and ironically, the newspapers at the time make fun of him. They say it's a lousy speech because at the time, the standard is to say very long speeches, 2 or 3 hours was really common, and he gives a 2-minute one. Some of the newspapers that didn't like Lincoln had headlines that read, "The great ape has done it again." They made fun of his height and his hairiness and said that, oh man, he's like an ape, completely uncontrollable up there, doesn't know what he's doing. The press just were savage against him for most of the time that he was president. He was a very divisive president. I mean, he would have to be for half the country to want to secede and leave the country and start a civil war. But even people in the North couldn't agree over whether they liked Lincoln or not. A few things changed that. The first thing to change that is the Emancipation Proclamation, where Lincoln starts to promote this idea of wanting to get rid of certain elements of slavery. The next thing that really promotes Lincoln in people's minds is this victory at Gettysburg, and then when they have actually time to analyze the words in the Gettysburg Address, they realize that, wow, these are actually great words after all. But the thing that really solidifies Lincoln as a great president in most people's minds is his assassination. I hate to say that, but it's true. He was very divisive, but when he's assassinated and people see that he has given his life for this cause, suddenly his reputation as a president and the words that he spoke and the things that he stood for during the war are propelled to a level never seen before by anyone else, because he is the first president ever assassinated. But we'll get into that when you guys end up doing a CSI investigation on the Lincoln assassination in the upcoming week. That's the Gettysburg Address. I hope you understood it. If not, there's some really good videos and stuff on YouTube that explain it. I encourage you to read through it once more now that you understand what he's saying, and see if you really do understand it or not. But even to this day, it is considered one of the greatest speeches ever given. Have a great day.